Today we're going to talk through a really simple structure that lots of savvy landlords, so LLs, are using to bypass the valuation impact on their commercial building if they're working with a flex partner or operator under a management style agreement, right? So the first box is the landlord with their beautiful asset. And as many of you know, a management agreement, is a variable income style model. So the landlord's willing to take risk, but also the reward and the benefits of working with a co-working or a flex partner to help elevate their building and provide certain amenities and flexibility to their tenant community. However, under a management style agreement, you don't get a guaranteed rent. You don't get 100% of that as a guaranteed form of income. It's a variable form of income because it's a business at the end of the day, right? So the landlord enters into a partnership style agreement where they get a percentage of the revenue or profit, and maybe there's some sort of base rental guarantee or equivalent. The problem with that from a valuation perspective is the formula for when valuing commercial assets is that traditionally it's really, underpinned by traditional leases, guaranteed rent, so to speak, at least on paper. So even if you have a very small percentage of that building, so even a tiny bit at the bottom, under a variable form of income and not guaranteed rent, well, that might take a, say, 30% hit in terms of what that market rent income could have been because it's not guaranteed. So then suddenly your building, if it's a small one that could have been worth 20 million, even if it's a small amount of space, could be looking at a valuation of 18, right? And that's kind of the reason why when you look at a management agreement structure, there's certain head scratching decisions to be made going, we want this, but it might impact the valuation of the asset and the integrity for it. So till valuers catch up and realize that having a flex in the building actually improves the value of the asset because it provides the tenant community flexibility, amenities, and makes them more sticky. What landlords have been doing is setting up SPVs. So the second box is we'll call it SPVs, special purpose vehicles. So just think of it like a holding company, right? And the SPV is the company that will take the lease from the landlord at $1 per square meter agreed rent, like just a traditional rent. And basically that's the deal that the building does with the SPV. So from a building value perspective, that floor that should have gone to a flex operator under management agreement is now doing a lease with that SPV. And then that SPV, which is 100% owned by that landlord, then does a management agreement with the flex operator. And this is under variable income, right? Or you could do some sort of hybrid lease or hybrid deal. Now, this model helps retain some form of valuation integrity. Well, 100% of the valuation integrity for the landlord, even though they're taking the risk by undertaking the SPV. But they also get the upside, right? Because much of the time, if you're going to do a flex deal like that, even if you're very commercially orientated, you're going to be gunning for something more than a market rent. So that landlord will see the upside, especially if they're very confident that that flex operation will do well in that building and in that part of town. This is, really important because it's not just about owners who are thinking about valuation questions. There's certain companies, large ones out there that are actually structured like staple securities. And not to bore you, but in Australia, if they're structured in that way, only 2% of their gross income can actually be non-passive. Meaning most of it has to be rent or some sort of property stuff. It can't be a business like a co-working business. So as soon as they do that, even though it may not seem like a big deal, then suddenly all of their income, goes into a certain level of, well, does it now get taxed under new terms? So does it go from 0 to 30% or something like that? Which is why that's a big head stretcher. And this is a solution for certain assets that could be looked at as well. Now, what I'd like to think, just to close this, is when you do a valuation equation for a building, there's what you call a vacancy allowance. So rather than value the building at 100% occupied with all the rents, and then that's the value that it spits out, they normally have a vacancy allowance. And from my understanding in Australia, it's sitting around 5%. It could be different, but you get the picture. I think there's a argument to be made that 5% could be creeping higher and higher in the market that we live in right now in certain parts of town or in certain cities or countries because of the way that people are working now. So by putting a flex operator or amenity or these kind of things. It doesn't even have to be flex, sorry. I think that 5% you can hold firmer on that. So there's value even under the variable income, the management agreement model, because if it suddenly is helping you hold firm on that 5% in a market where, you know, vacancy is higher than that, well, then when you think about the valuation of your asset is actually being protected. It's almost like a defensive move by putting some of these amenities on it. So it's almost like, you know, a defensive strategy here. So I just felt like talking about that stuff. Hopefully it's helpful. I think it's an important thing to consider. And if you've got any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If there's anything else that you want me to talk about or do some digging and share it in this kind of scribble format, let me know and I'll speak to you again soon.